It's been almost 10 years. Some memories fade, some don't. I still remember the phone call. I still remember the drive to the police station. And I still remember my parents' voice. And I still miss my brother. "10 years is a long time. At least that's what people tell you. But there are certain days that don't feel 10 years ago. They feel like yesterday. My brother would have turned 46 this year. And as I've thought about his birthday and the anniversary of his death approaching, I've found myself revisiting memories I haven't thought about in years. Some good, some painful, some that still don't make sense. I'm one of 5 boys, but Freddie and I were only 15 months apart. So for most of our childhood, it was really just the two of us. We grew up together, we fought like brothers, we laughed like brothers, we drove our parents crazy like brothers. And life eventually took us down different paths, and for a period of time we became pretty distant. Not because we stopped loving each other, but because life gets complicated. And then something happened that I still struggle to explain. After leaving the Marine Corps, not knowing where I'd end up and where I'd end up getting a job, I interviewed with companies all over the country, and I could have ended up almost anywhere. But instead, I ended up in Detroit, living at Freddie's house. And only a few months later, he was gone. For a long time, I thought the story was about loss, and now I realize it's about something else. It's about love, it's about regret, it's about forgiveness, and especially it's about faith. And I think it's learning how to carry someone with you long after they're gone. And this is Grieving Freddy. So I was born in Miami, Florida, born to Cuban immigrant parents who came to this country when they were very young. My father had a previous marriage and had a son at a very young age, and then he married my mom and had 4 more boys. So I'm one of 5 boys, the middle child, and I live up to every stereotype of being the middle child. And the age differences between all of us made it so that me and my brother Freddie, who were only 15 months apart, we grew up so close. My oldest brother is 5 years older than me. My next brother after me is about 6 years younger, and then the youngest is 11 years younger. So for many years, me and Freddie grew up so close. We were almost like twins, 15 months apart. His birthday is in June and mine in September. And we just had an amazing upbringing, had amazing parents, had an amazing childhood, growing up in Miami with our cousins, friends, family, just such a cheerful, happy, memories that I have of our childhood. And we grew up just, growing up at the YMCA, going out, coming of age. We just had such an incredible upbringing, and we were such close siblings, but we were so different. Our whole lives, we had such different personalities. I always remember myself as the consultative one, always trying to tell him even how to play video games and, what he needed to do to beat the games. And he would beat all the video games. I was terrible at video games, but he was great. And we just had an amazing childhood. We grew up in a blue-collar upbringing, nothing spectacular in that sense, but we never felt like we needed anything because we're so active and we had each other and we're always playing outside. That's just an amazing background, amazing parents who love us very much. And so no issues there, really just a normal, steady background. Eventually, our lives started to cross different paths, and even as we started to go into the high school age, I get a girlfriend, he gets a girlfriend, we kind of spend less time together. And at a certain age, he decided he was going to go into the Navy, and unfortunately he had a short stint with the Navy, but and then I left to the Marine Corps right after high school, and where our differences really started to to compound, and where our distance started to create is unfortunately his substance abuse and his addiction. And I spent many days and nights obviously worried about him, but I also was young and trying to make my own way in the world as a young Marine, where that just didn't align with my vision. It didn't align with my goals. It didn't align with my values. And I just created a lot of distance and resentment. And I think about that so much in this day and age, and how much I regret that I wasn't there as a brother to be supportive, but I didn't know any better. So I've grown to give myself permission to forgive myself for that. But I think a lot about, moments of, just wanting to create distance, not wanting to be around this person, not wanting him around me and my friends, my new friends, people that I've met who I, wanted to, go down a different life path. And I distanced myself from him, and we created a lot of angst, a lot of animosity. We had some struggles, just being brothers again, being friends, being brothers. There was definitely a lot of distance there. Unfortunately, I can tell you about times where, it's Mother's Day and I'm on vacation from the Marines. Christmas, I'm on vacation from the Marines, and having to take him with my mom to rehab. That was terrible. That was a terrible experience. And I remember having so much resentment towards that, anger towards how a person could do that on Christmas. How could a person do that on Mother's Day? And not realizing that, that was the moment he needed his mother. And not only that, but he needed his father, he needed his brother, he needed his family to come and rescue him. And I didn't see it that way. And I've had a lot of regret since his passing about the way I handled that. Things that I wish I could have changed. I wish I was more mature. I wish I was smarter and wiser. And I've come to the realization that how could I have been? I hadn't experienced it yet. I had no idea what the outcome would be. And I think that's why I've become so vocal about reconciliation, about reaching out to the people that you love and care about, is because you don't know what the outcome could be. You don't know if you could lose somebody. You don't know that person that's screaming and begging for your help, begging for your attention. And I didn't know it at the time. I just didn't really recognize it. I was very selfish, very self-centered about my career, the appearances, the way that it would impact me, the way that it would, instead of saying, man, how can I help this person? How can I really focus my attention and my energy towards helping this person? I just didn't know. I didn't know better. And it's no excuse. I think as you age, you get a little more mature and you realize those things. As a father, you realize those things. But I wish I could have been a better brother in that case. I wish I could have been a better friend. And that's something I live with every single day. And it's very hard. It's very hard to know that when a person needed you the most, you turn your back on them. And that's what I struggle with the most. And I'll, till the last breath, I will try my best to find people, inspire people, motivate people to be able to realize that this life that we live is so precious, and the people that we love and care about, sometimes we might not always agree with them. We might not, always see eye to eye, but they need us. They need us, and we need to seek out ways to reach out. So yeah, this part of our life, unfortunately, man, Freddy's substance abuse created a situation where I needed to create distance. And especially as I started to get married, start a family, I needed to protect my family and keep them away from this substance problem and this addiction, because I didn't know how to control it. And so I became very protective of my wife and children, not wanting them to be around this type of scenario. And in that, obviously created distance, created animosity, created friction between the two of us. And it's something I struggle with every single day. Yeah, so I believe through divine intervention, of all places, I would end up with DaVita, but in Detroit, Michigan. And the unbelievable set of coincidence is that Freddie had been living there for a while now with his wife. She was from the Michigan area. And so of all the places that I could end up, and of course, a lot of people, once they get out of the military, they just want to go back to their hometown, which for me would have been Miami. My wife and all her family in Miami, but we ended up in Detroit. And my wife, God bless her, she supported it. And we said, hey, we're packing it up and we're moving to Michigan. And so at that time, I accepted the role, and it was around April or so is when I got started. So my kids, Tina and the kids, had to stay back in North Carolina so they could finish the school year. And I went ahead of them, and I moved to Michigan and stayed at my brother Freddie's house. And it was incredible. It was like that gave me an opportunity to like patch things up with him, not knowing, right? That's what makes it such an incredible story, is that of all the places I could end up, not only did I end up in Michigan, not only did I end up in Detroit, but I was living in his basement and got to spend time with him, eat breakfast with him, have lunch, go to dinner, went to the gym a few times, and just really spend some time healing a wound that I hadn't even realized needed to heal at that moment. And so we got to spend that time together, and just incredible. When I think of the whole story, that to me is like, that's it. Like, how of all the places in the world I would end up in Detroit. And that was in April. And so fast forward a little bit, the kids get there, Tina and the kids get there in May time frame, and we got settled into our first house in Michigan, and we got to spend some time with Freddie. And then, just a few months later, August 2nd, he passed away. What was so amazing is you realize these things in hindsight, but like, this was the first time that my children were able to really interact with Freddie. We'd lived all over the country. We'd not really lived near each other. And so it was the first time they got to hang out and see each other. He got to see my son. And so I think it was such an incredible period. They were so young, they were so young. But it was good that they at least, we have photos together of them. We have some memories together. We spent essentially what would have been his last birthday at my house, celebrated, cut a cake for him. And then unfortunately, his demise would happen on August 2nd, only a few months later. So it was like just enough time to patch things up. And it's incredible because we found closure. There was some closure there, closure that you didn't realize was going to happen, because obviously there was no clue, no idea that unfortunately he would pass away so soon. But I'm thankful that in that limited amount of time that we did have together, we were able to have positive moments, positive memories. And so I'm just so thankful for that. And when I think about the idea of divine intervention, like you can't ask for a more incredible example than this. You can't ask for a more incredible example of, the stars having to align to perform this perfect miracle that would, of all the places, to take me to Detroit, Michigan, where I have had no family, no business being in that freezing cold weather, but it was to go there and spend that time with him. I mean, that alone in and of itself to me is just proof of that divine power. And so I was so thankful for that. And to me, I think that's what reignited my faith. Really reignited my faith is the fact that we would end up there, patch up that time, find some closure. So we'd already been in Michigan for about a little over 3 months. Well, I'd been in Michigan for a little over 3 months. Kids had just gotten settled in. We started a summer t-ball team, and I was the coach. I was at a t-ball game. Come back, or t-ball game or t-ball practice. I gotta check some of this stuff. Gets a little fuzzy. And it's August 2nd. It's in the evening. And I get this phone call from my mom, just screaming at the top of her lungs, crying, saying, he's not with us, he's not with us. And I'm completely shocked. I don't know what to expect. And she's just yelling, crying, telling me he's no longer with us. And in my head, I'm thinking, I've already dealt with so many of Freddie's stories and so many of his incidents that maybe this is a total misunderstanding. So I call his wife. She's screaming, crying, saying that he's no longer with us and that she's on her way to the police station. And I just got in the car and started driving. And I remember that drive like it was yesterday, and I live it in my head so often. And I started saying prayers that were just the most absurd. I started mixing prayers, Hail Mary, God, glory be our Father. I mixed them all up. I said everything I could, saying, God, please let this be a misunderstanding. Let this be another one of Freddy's, unfortunate incidents, but hopefully this is a misunderstanding. And I remember getting to the police station and sitting down with the detectives, just talking about it, and I just couldn't comprehend what he was telling me. And I remember having to identify his body, which was tough. And I still think of that face of identifying his body. I still think of that face and going through that whole process. And, I had to collect myself and get myself together and call my parents and tell them that he had passed. And that was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my whole life. And I remember my knees buckled. I remember just falling to my knees. I couldn't believe what I had just said, and that he passed. And that was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my whole life, was to tell my parents that their son had died. And, I had to spend some time there at the police station, and my sister-in-law showed up, and obviously having to comfort her and go through that process. And then it's crazy because there's things, and I feel like that's kind of why I want to tell this story, because I don't want to forget. I don't want to forget any of this. And I don't remember a lot about that day, much after that. I just remember some of those moments. And I remember going through, just all this administrative paperwork, getting his stuff, his belongings. I still have a little Ziploc bag from the police station with his glasses that's in my nightstand. And then I had to go home. There was nothing I could do. I just had to go home. And I remember my parents were trying to fly up to Detroit, and their flight, I was on the phone, and I just remember my dad sobbing. And my mom is stoic, she's telling him to knock it off and, quit crying as he's on the flight, on the airplane. And unfortunately, the flight got canceled and they couldn't come. And I remember just telling him, you don't need to come here. There's nothing for you to do here. Just stay home, and we need to figure out how to, get his body back to Miami. And I remember just going home and crying my eyes out. And then the next day, it was, there was the unusual kind of scenario of hey, this is, Freddy is a Miami kid, man. We're Miami people, and he needs to be buried in Miami. But the reality is his wife was his next of kin, and ultimately the decision maker for those decisions. And I remember feeling that I didn't have the chance to properly grieve and process it, because all I could think about was making sure that I could persuade her, and not that she wasn't going to give in, but persuading her to allow us to just basically take over this process and have his body sent back to Miami to be buried. And so the next day, I had to dress him up at a local funeral, because they process that stuff. And I remember having to dress him up and put a tie on him and have him lay there. And it's like I had my own moment. I had my own moment, like my own viewing in this funeral home. So that I could say goodbye before having to go be, Alex the tough guy down in Miami for everyone. And I remember until that body left, I was worried. I was worried that, there would be maybe some last minute audible that, hey, we want to keep him here, or delay that process, but I knew he needed to get back home as soon as possible. And then we started, the arrangements to get down to Miami. And I remember just arriving in Miami at my parents' house. All our family was there. And people saying how brave I was. And I was like, I'm not brave. Oh, I didn't feel brave. And I felt like annoyed that I would be celebrated. I mean, so much of the distance with Freddie and I was that he had so many struggles and I was held as this golden boy, and I am so far from that. And it bothered me. It bothered me to be thought of that way in this moment. And then one of the, just the most incredible moments, you look back at it, my dad and my brother both work for American Airlines. And my dad and brother both work on the ramp, so they load and unload the planes. My dad's been working for American Airlines for almost 40 years. And when my brother's remains arrived, the whole airline, everybody was out there supporting my brother and my dad, man. And I wish I would have been there. I wish so badly I could have been there, but then that was their moment. That was their moment. And it was like this heroic return, like this hero had been returned back home. My dad, who's held in such high regard at, American Airlines, had this moment, man. Look at this picture of him. As he's receiving his son. It's one of the saddest pictures I've ever seen in my life, man. And I'm so thankful that they created that moment for him. I remember I helped him write a letter to the CEO of American Airlines, just expressing his gratitude for the reception that they got. I mean, the whole crew was out there to receive my brother's remains. I think about a lot of 10 years have passed and I haven't checked in on my own brothers to be like, how are you processing this? Every year on the birthday, on the anniversary, text, hey, how's it going? But I haven't done a good job of checking in on them, man. So you think, gosh, am I repeating the same mistake? Am I making the same mistake? Is a text enough? How do you become more present? How do you become a little more available? And I think it's partially because I've created this stoic personality where I've not opened up to people. And that's something that I want to change. I don't want to continue this way. I want to help people. I want to let people know I'm human just like everybody else. And I want to make myself available to those who are struggling, because this sucks, man. This is freaking painful. This is one of the worst moments of my life. And I just want to be better. I just want to be better for my family. That's it. I remember one of the most vivid memories during this process was, when he passed, he wasn't home, and so his vehicle was taken to a tow yard, and going and picking up his truck and driving it home. And I remember driving this loud, heavy truck, just sobbing the whole way. And it's, I remember it so vividly, just driving with this thing rattling and the smell of cigarettes because he smoked, and just driving that truck, crying my eyes out, man. It was so tough. It was so tough doing that. But those are the things, I don't want to forget these memories. I don't want to forget these because they are so much a part of that experience and so much a part of, my story, that I want to continue to think about the scent, the sound, the feeling. Every bit of that just is part of this whole episode, But I remember that being tough, driving down the street with that truck. For many years, I carried this, on top of the sadness and grief, I carried this tremendous amount of regret, this sense of shame in myself, in my character, and how could I have not been a better person? How could I have not been a better brother? How could I have not, done everything I could to help this person? But I also, over the years, realized like we're viewing the world a little bit differently, behaving a little bit differently. I had to protect my wife. I had to protect my children from this. And I give myself some permission to be forgiven. But I also, because of how strong my faith is, I realize like there's nothing I could have done. There's nothing I could have done to prevent this. There's nothing I could have done to stop this. The regret I have is even inappropriate because it would imply that I could have done something that just wasn't meant to be. It wasn't meant to be, and the distance and perhaps the cold shoulder, which is a tough way to put it, but that's exactly what I gave. I gave a cold shoulder. That's part of what I had to learn in order to develop as a man, as a husband, as a son, as a father, as a brother. And I'm still learning because I haven't figured it all out. And I continue to struggle with, have I looked at this moment and actually applied the lessons? Have I actually taken what God is trying to teach me and applied it in a meaningful way? And so it's a constant struggle. It's a constant struggle. I do find myself, of course, talking to more people about grief and loss and trying to be comforting. But like anything, I'm just human. I'm just human going through this very difficult experience. And despite it being 10 years that have passed, it never goes away. There's a hole in your heart that never heals. No matter what I tell my parents, that's a hole in their heart that's never going to heal. Not just on the birthdays and the Christmases. It's every day there's something. You have these little subtle reminders that remind you of stories, remind you of the good times and the bad times. And so it's so important to do that. But for many years, I carried a very heavy sense of shame, resentment, guilt, and regret that I feel like I'm working through, thank God. So, but it takes time. It takes time. You got to go through it. It takes time and you got to go through it. A lot of what I think about with this scenario is I think about it from my perspective as a brother, but I try so hard now as a father. My oldest, all of my kids are teenagers now, and I'm getting to that age where I'm viewing things like how would my parents, or how could I put myself in their shoes? How could I try? And it's impossible because nobody could ever experience that. Nobody could ever explain and articulate what that must feel like. And my heart bleeds for my parents as I think through that. And as much as I try to comfort them with the fact that this was divine intervention, it had to happen, and this was God's timing and God's calling, is that I find myself almost selfishly, perhaps cowardly, saying, gosh, but I have a strong faith in it, and I do believe that this was meant to be, God, but please don't let that happen to me. I really don't want to experience that. And I worry that that's the wrong way to think about it. And it's just such a hard thing to experience, man. It's such a hard thing to experience as a dad. I hope, that you don't have, I think about my children and I just say, gosh, I hope that there isn't some type of tragedy that I should anticipate happening, because this is horrible. It's a horrible experience. And I'm very thankful that my parents have been able to kind of grieve, but also move on for us. Because we as their children, my siblings, we needed our parents. We needed our parents not to become paralyzed by grief. Just like I needed to not be paralyzed by grief so that I can be the best husband, father, brother, son that I could be. And I'm thankful that my parents, they've handled it tremendously well. They're struggling and they've done such an amazing job of being strong. And you say, gosh, well, is it being strong, or is it just they're going through their moments? They're going through their moments on their own time, in their own special way. And I always just hope that they can find comfort. As I continue to seek comfort, I hope that my parents can. And that's true for my sister-in-law, who's a widow, her children, who he was their stepfather. I really pray that they were able to get closure and comfort and grief, comfort and relief, because this is something that just doesn't go away. When you lose somebody special, it just doesn't go away. Yeah. So I guess one thing that's top of mind is like just saying like, hey, I hate to put my personal business out there and use this as an opportunity to share some of these intimate moments, but I feel like part of me has anger that we don't talk about these things, that we don't share these stories, and we try to cover it up, and we don't share these stories with our families. And as a result, we don't give the stories enough attention and share it with our family members who might be going through a similar scenario. So we don't do that because we're so concerned about appearances or how will people react. These stories are not secrets. People know the story. And so I've been angry and I've carried a lot of this anger because I want these stories to be known. I have to be able to tell my children these stories. I have to be able to tell people that I care about these stories. If not, there's a possibility they'll repeat themselves. And that's what gets me so fired up is, I don't know if it's a cultural thing, but we just naturally try to sweep these stories under the rug in hopes of just acting like they never happened, but they did. And they changed us. They changed me. Those stories changed me. And they changed the way I view the world. They changed the way I interact as a husband, as a father, as a son. And that's why it's so important to get these stories out. And I feel compelled to tell them. Obviously, I want to honor my family. I want to honor my brother. But it's so important to share these moments so that people that are going through a similar situation can also reflect on them and realize, hey, maybe I need to revisit my relationship with my family. Maybe I need to lower my guard and go and be the best version of myself and go be that person, be that friend, be that brother, be that parent that's needed for that moment. Because our time on this earth is so precious and it's fleeting. You know, I talk about that a lot. It's so important to get out there and interact with those people you care about, because you never know if they'll be here today and gone tomorrow. You know, what I remember the most about Freddie is his personality, his sense of humor. You know, everybody just, he was stubborn, a compulsive liar. He was absolute full of shit. Every time he said something, he was lying. You know, and in a funny way. You know, as kids do, embellish the truth. But he was such a funny guy, and I hope that people will remember him, of course, for his sense of humor. He just made people laugh. He had these funny little songs he would make up, little jingles. I mean, just such funny stories that you kind of, they're hard to explain, hard for anybody else to find them humorous unless you lived through it or unless you were there, you knew him personally. But he just had such an incredible personality, um, and I miss that. I think a lot about those moments. I think a lot about what it meant to be so young and innocent, and just not a care in the world. And I miss that. I miss having that with him. And I think about what could life have been like as adults. One of the things that hurts the most is just thinking that as I share these stories with my own kids, they're not going to have his perspective. They're not going to have the way he saw it. They're only going to have one-sided view, and that's hurtful. That's hurtful to think that he's not around to tell his side of the story, which is extremely painful. I got to think of like a good story that, I mean, we got some stories that should not be repeated, I'll tell you that. But I'm trying to think of like a good one that's appropriate. Yeah. Yeah, appropriate for mom. Even though mom knows them all, man. Mom knows all the stories. We got caught doing everything we did wrong, so mom knows all the stories. Yeah, she knows them all. I think I can. Just, again, one of the funniest ones is he was such a compulsive liar. It was so funny. He was like, he shot his bow and arrow into our neighbor's house, and she was like this bombshell blonde who would mow the lawn in a bikini. Yeah, and he shoots his bow and arrow into her backyard, and he will, to probably to his on his deathbed, he would admit, or he would still defend the idea that she was trying to seduce him when he went into the backyard to get his bow and arrow, or the arrow from the bow and arrow. Yeah, no, I don't think that was the case. But that, I mean, stuff like that was incredible. He was so funny playing laser tag, football. I mean, we played every single sport you can think of. a bunch of Cuban kids rollerblading in the middle of the street playing hockey. We skateboarded, basketball. We practically grew up in the YMCA doing paintball in the back. We lived in a YMCA that was like, the back of it was like a forest. And he was, I remember boxing with him, and he knocked me down as I'm getting up. He extends an arm to help me up and then punches me again and knocks me back down. So it's like, he was your typical big brother, man. Awesome. Loved him, admired him. Just, we were inseparable. As kids, we were inseparable. And we have so many funny memories together, as in all the different stages, the stage of your life where you're playing video games, where you're running around at the YMCA playing sports, when you're starting to have friends who drive and going out and trying to, meet girls and stuff like that. So we got so many good memories, and we were, again, inseparable.